Okay, hi everybody. So I hope you've enjoyed having that 10-minute break. Next up in our session, we've got myself and Ramona Naicker, who's going to be catching up about her presentation on critically appraising for anti-racism that was at CALC 2021. So hi Ramona.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me.
We're really happy to have you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, fine. I'm just in the library at the moment in the little computer room. So people keep coming in to bother me. So if I'm like, just ignore that.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a big risk, isn't it, doing
Yeah.
in your workplace? I'd like to lock the door that I'm in. A little room I'm in. So, I've got a big list of questions here for you, so we'll see how many I can manage to get through in the time that we've got. As before, for anyone listening in, do feel free to post questions in the chat, and I'll try and save us 10 minutes or so at the end to take some questions from the audience, if that's okay. So, first thing I wanted to ask you is, so you presented at CALC 2021. Could you give us a quick elevator pitch for what it is that you talked about to our attendees in that session?
Yeah, so my talk was about critically appraising for anti-racism. So that's looking at research articles like papers about clinical trials and assessing them for racial bias. So as a clinical librarian, one of my jobs is to teach critical appraisal, so assessing or appraising the methodological robustness of research. And this is important because not all research is good research, unfortunately. Even if it's been published in a peer-reviewed journal. But of course, research is acted upon, and in the health sciences, new treatments are developed, and this impacts patient care and so on. So what we do is we appraise research papers to check that they're sound, really more than anything. And there's lots of tools to help us, so checklists and guides to help us determine bias in a research article. But it's not really accepted or expected for us to appraise for racial bias in research, even though it does occur, and it can have some real world consequences. Minoritized ethnic populations are underrepresented in research, but also the way health disparities between different racial and ethnic groups are interpreted, so falsely put down to biology instead of kind of recognizing social determinants of health. And that can be really problematic later on in the real world as well. So one way to mitigate that is, and hopefully as well ensure that researchers of the future, don't follow the same kind of practices, is to recognise and challenge when racial bias has occurred in published research. So my talk was really just a kind of call to action, I guess, for library and information professionals to start looking out for racial bias in research and start critically appraising for anti-racism.
Awesome. I just realised I haven't put this into your questions, but I was just going to, just for our attendees who wouldn't know or might not know, who are the main people that you're teaching usually in your setting?
So all sorts of people. So it could be students, so medical students or nursing students, but also clinicians. So we have consultants and nurses, and also the whole variety of clinicians, AHPs and so on. So it's a pretty broad scope, and all of them will use critical appraisal for different things. So medical students, it's just part of their medical education that they learn how to appraise. So later on, and when they're professionals, they know how to recognize good and bad research. And I mean, the same goes for all nurses. It's part of their kind of revalidation process that they're able to read research and be able to understand it. But yeah, so all staff in the trust, all medical staff in the trust that make decisions based on research.
Awesome, thank you. So one of the things that I picked up right at the start of your talk back at CALC 2021 is that you mentioned that this is your first time ever speaking at a conference, and we were your first sort of conference you spoke at. How was that experience for you on reflection? And have you had a chance to speak at any other events or conferences?
So yeah, it was my first conference and I was so nervous. I remember just being so nervous, but it was such a great first conference to speak at. I think the fact that it was online just helped so much. You get to hide behind your screen, but also the nature of the conference itself, you know, the themes and the topics and the way it was organized just made it just comfortable, and I felt like I was, you know, in a safe space to talk, especially because the topic, you know, I was a bit worried it might ruffle some kind of white fragility feathers, so it went really well, so I was really happy with it. Looking over the talk, so I watched the video, which I hate doing, I hate watching myself, and I've now, you know, presented this now at other events. So there are things from the talk I gave at CALC last year that I would and have changed. You know, I've learned quite a lot about the topic since last year, especially around like genetic ancestry and things like that. So the CALC talk was really the beginning of all of it, and the topic, in my understanding of it, has evolved quite a bit, so reflection is very important, but I'm really happy and proud that, you know, people do still watch it and get like a bit of a light bulb moment, you know, like, why have we never discussed this before? And it did really open doors for talking at other events as well. So since last year I've spoken at just loads of events really. I spoke at NIHR, which is the National Institute of Health Research, at their London Consortium day that they had. And I get invited to speak so often. I've presented at 2 separate conferences, 2 UHMLG conferences. So that's the University Health and Medical Librarians group, I think. And I held a workshop there as well, which is good. So I think hopefully I'm improving a lot when it comes to public speaking. And a couple of those have been in real life as well, so not, you know, outside of the safety of the screen. So that was a bit daunting, but no, it's been, you know, on reflection, it was my first conference and it was so well received that I think it really boosted my confidence around it as well.
Awesome, thank you. I'll put your check in the post for all of that you said about CALC data. Yeah, awesome. So I think you've covered a little bit around sort of what other events and conferences you might speak to, but is there anything else that you've been doing since with this work?
Yeah, so you know, this CALC talk that I gave last year, it's kept me pretty busy, to be honest. So during the talk itself, I mentioned about working with CASP to develop their kind of supplementary checklist, but unfortunately, for reasons around funding, and because they were not being funded for it, they were kind of doing it off their own back, that just hasn't been taken any further at all. So, and they've been pretty quiet when I've reached out to them, which has been a little bit disappointing. But I just went ahead and just developed my own checklist, really, which I've been sharing, so that's good. I've added a critically appraising for anti-racism session to our library offerings, and I know other libraries have done the same. You know, I see my work on lots of library websites, which is really lovely. So thank you all so much, and if anybody's watching. So at my last conference at UHMLG, I gave a train the trainer session, just to support any librarians that do want to offer the sessions in their libraries. And I developed a website which hosts kind of support materials for people that want to make use of those. And in this workshop that I held a separate workshop at UHMLG to improve the checklist that I've got. So it was really nice. It was really nice. A lot of people kind of gave their advice and opinions on like the structure and the wording and all that kind of stuff. And so I've made improvements on that, and hopefully the UHMLG group and myself will kind of arrange something to test the tool, like maybe like a journal club or, you know, something along those lines. So that would be nice. I'm working with Health Education England at the moment to develop an online module about health inequities in research. So that will be part of their series of critical appraisal modules. So they've got quite a few. So health inequities will be one of them. And I'm doing that work with Michelle Maiden from Liverpool Uni. If you've worked in healthcare libraries in the north, I'm sure you've heard of her. And John Blackensop from North Tees, and they're both like critical appraisal experts, which is really fantastic because I always feel a little bit imposter syndrome about critical appraisal. You know, I talk about it so much, but actually it's a topic that, you know, there's just so much to learn about critical appraisal. You just never really feel like you know it all. Next week, I'm heading down to Cardiff University. So they've been amazing. So they saw the talk and immediately decided to add it to their medical education curriculum, which is huge. That's absolutely massive. It's like, you know, it's a pretty big university. So I'm going down next week to help support kind of develop that. And UHMLG have been funding that for me, so that's really nice. And I wrote a paper, my first paper. Well, I'm still kind of amending the final draft, but I'm hoping that by the stage it will get published. And that will be in the Education for Information journal. So they have a special autumn issue around critical race theory. where the Critical Race Theory Collective, or the CRT Collective, are serving as an editorial team. And that's been a really great experience, really great learning experience, and learning more about critical race theory too, which I don't, obviously what I'm doing is critical race theory, but I never really kind of put that together in that way. And the CRT Collective, so this body, they're a group of information professionals and scholars who want to see racial equity and justice in our communities. So yeah, everybody do definitely check them out. And I think that's it, which has been quite a lot though.
Is that it? Is that all you've been doing for the past 18 months? Wow, that's incredible. And I guess this sort of links in a little bit. So the recording of the talk that you did at CALC, we recorded it, we put it onto our YouTube channel, and it's since proved to be incredibly popular. So it's had 650 plus views in the last year, which is really huge for a tiny little conference like us. So what do you think it is about your work that's connected so well with other people?
So it's been overwhelmingly positive. I didn't think, after that talk, I got so many comments and feedback. It was really overwhelming. It was really fantastic. And much more people connected with it than I thought they would. But when I think about it, I think it's just because it's just so obvious, these are issues that we all know about. We all know minoritized people are underrepresented in research, and we all know that minoritized ethnic populations might have different or worse health outcomes because of social determinants, right? Not because of biology. But this biological belief, it still lingers, and it's used as an explanation in research. And we saw both of these things happen during COVID. So, at this stage, they're almost common knowledge, and that they impact research. So all I really did was be like, maybe we should quality appraise for them like we do other shortcomings in research. It's just a simple, obvious suggestion that I think, first of all, most people just understood it and agreed with it. And second, everybody was just shocked that we weren't doing this already. So I think it really resonated with people. And then I think also the timing was just right as well, the political climate around inequalities and COVID and Black Lives Matter. And it was just a time that everyone really started taking notice and started just wanting to do what they can. And I think we saw it in the librarian community so much, people really becoming allies and trying really hard to, to do what they can. So time was right, but also I think it's an important subject that I think when people hear about it, they're like, oh yeah, that's true, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing a lot of the interest has been from health librarians, but also people that are working in the healthcare sector, but also people working in universities that support health courses. Would that be right?
Yeah, definitely. So certainly librarians are the big advocates, but yeah, university librarians, which is really lovely because I work in the NHS, where it's really hard to make changes in the NHS, but in universities they have a bit more scope, a bit more funding to do such things. So hearing from university representatives has been fantastic. And then like research groups like the NIHR who reached out to me. But again, I think all of these links were made through librarians. This Cardiff University thing that I'm doing is with their medical education team, but it was introduced by the librarians. So librarians have really been pivotal in getting the information out there. Yeah.
Wow, awesome. So back in sort of 2021, you've sort of mentioned it here. You were talking to that CALC audience that probably already had a really strong interest in equity and anti-racism work, just by the nature of the conference and the attendees that we get. What kind of reception have you had when you presented your work elsewhere, so outside of the library sort of field and sector, in healthcare or with medical educationalists?
Yeah, so it has just been incredibly positive all over, and as I said, it's led to so many opportunities. Usually because of librarians. I get invited to speak all the time, and I receive emails from librarians and clinicians who want to adapt my sessions. So it really just all goes to show that people recognise these issues and want to do something about it. And and though it has been largely information professionals who were very nice and maybe a little bit biased, I guess, but I did present at this NIHR event in London, virtually. So this was like researchers and clinicians, not really librarians. And this was quite valuable because I was challenged about race and biology, and that some races are actually more likely to suffer from certain conditions because of genetics. So this was like a clinician that challenged me, who probably definitely knows what they're talking about more than me. So all of a sudden you start doubting everything that I've been teaching and saying. And at the time, I didn't really have enough knowledge about the difference between genetic ancestry and race, and so I stumbled a little bit. But being challenged really kind of allowed me to learn more about it. I spoke to a consultant here at my trust about inherited diseases and race, and so now my case is just stronger, really stronger than ever. I've learned how to explain it in a more coherent way. So actually, while it's boss, that reception has always been positive for librarians, I think there's definitely value in being challenged as well, but it doesn't happen very often. So this is like the one instance I remember, whereas usually it is very positive. But I definitely welcome like people challenging me, and then it just allows me to learn more about the topic as well. Yeah.
So is sort of, I'm guessing that sort of this anti-racism and sort of critical appraisal, along with all of the extracurricular stuff that you're doing that's keeping you really busy, is that still a part of your sort of everyday practice as a librarian? And has it changed in any way since working on the sort of critical appraisal for anti-racism work that you've been doing?
So anti-racism is very much still part of the practice. We offer these critical appraisal for anti-racism sessions, which I've delivered to a few groups, but mostly, groups that already have a kind of investment in it. So like the BAME staff network here, and our research and development groups. So in general, although it is something that is offered on our library website as a training session, it doesn't really get much uptake, unfortunately. People don't want to just do extracurricular activities if they don't need to. So I've also adapted existing sessions to incorporate anti-racism a little bit more, so kind of planting those seeds, and I do some very bold self-promotion of my tool on my website, like during those sessions as well. And then outside of critical appraisal, I think just incorporating ideas around health inequalities in other sessions. So, for example, there was a really good talk given by Jane Morgan Daniels and colleagues from the University of Florida, who in their kind of generic literature searching sessions, they have like generic questions that you'd use as examples. The examples that they use always highlight health inequality, so it'll always be about some sort of health inequality. So while the students are learning about how to do a database search, they're also, becoming aware of different health inequalities. And so that's been a really good approach, and I've adapted that. Yeah, I think, did I even answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So I've got to apologise. I'm sort of darting around the questions that I sent you before on your toes. So could you tell us a little bit more about your the toolkit that you developed? So the process of what it involves, how people can use it. I'm going to drop a link to it in the chat box as well for people to have a look at later.
Yeah, so the website is critically appraising antiracism.org, I think. So this website hosts the checklist, so the critical appraisal tool for anybody that wants to appraise, and there's some guidance on there. So the workshop that I did really highlighted the need for people for just a bit more explanation around the tool and the terminology used. So that's all on there. And then there's some support materials for people that want to teach the sessions. So there are like example slides that people can adapt, and there's a trainer's guide. So definitely check it out if anybody wants to kind of adapt those sessions. The website is still a little bit under construction, but it's just a good place to host everything, all together. And the toolkit itself, I'm developing it all the time. So anybody that does use the online version will see that the update to date is always, the current month, because there's always like something to improve, words and explanations and so on. And because of this workshop, there were so many suggestions, and I haven't really been able to, act on all of them, and it's just an ever-evolving kind of field and ever-evolving process. So I haven't finished, and I'm pretty sure it might never finish. It'll just be one of those things. And as for like people who are using it as well, I think at the moment it is just librarians who are teaching. And I've had people use it during journal club sessions, but obviously the aim is that one day it might become a bit more standard. I'm supporting a systematic review at the moment for Age UK regarding health inequalities, so I'm hoping that will be the opportunity for it to shine. And also obviously the work that I'm supporting with Cardiff University, because it is the medical education team, hopefully that will help it become a little bit more mainstream. Those students completing that medical education module will use it going forward as well. So yeah, so it will carry on evolving, and there'll be, I'll want to add to it as well. Right now it is just about kind of racial health inequalities, but there are other protected characteristics and other populations that suffer from health inequalities as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can say sort of from experience, it's something I know that people in my team have brought to me and have said, have you seen this? I'm like, oh yeah, I have actually.
Oh really? Oh, that's so good.
But it's something, I mean, it's classic because librarians love a toolkit. We love a toolkit. We love example lesson plans. We love example slides. But I found it really useful to be able to see what sort of questions, but also I think it can just give you a little bit of confidence as well sometimes, particularly in, we know that the library profession is not very diverse. So to have something there which can help to facilitate those conversations can be really useful. And it's definitely something I think that that we've been talking about having as part of our offer when it comes to our health courses.
Oh, brilliant.
And academics respond really well to it because they're also looking for ways that they can incorporate equity into their teaching.
Definitely.
It's a good way of doing it. So,
and like what you said about, the confidence thing as well. And I think that's like part of the reason I did this whole trainer guide and slides is because I know, I mean, for my librarians here as well, the confidence of teaching something about like a controversial issue, I guess, and something that they don't feel that they should speak out about because they're not, from a minoritized ethnic group, which is, obviously not what it's intended for. Anybody can teach about it, but I think having that toolkit and just encouraging people, to take it on and do it themselves, and don't be worried if you get it wrong. It's fine. I do it all the time. I say the wrong thing, and and I think we just have to, accept that things evolve, things change, the terminology changes. I think at the CALC talk, I used the terminology BAME, which I now don't use anymore. Just things like that change all the time, and I think it's okay for us to make mistakes or change things from the past. And so hopefully the kind of guidance that I've written and the slides that I've produced will just give people that confidence to be able to take it on themselves as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it is about, like you say, it's about that confidence, and it's about feeling like being brave to be able to have conversations like that, and to incorporate it. And I guess this maybe links on. So your work has been, because you're all centered on health and medical research, but we also know that underrepresentation and racist interpretation of results is also present in other disciplines, such as social sciences. Are you aware of any work or something similar being used in those research areas that maybe look at the things that you're looking at in health?
Yeah, so certainly not just medicine, and I think especially social sciences is a discipline where this work could really be applied, and it is being. So I've had a few conversations with other librarians on the issue of racism in, for example, like studies about school children and educational attainment and behaviour and being suspended and things like that. And there are disparities between races, but how these disparities have been interpreted. So they can be quite victim blaming, blaming culture, or using socioeconomic status as a proxy for race without like discussing these groups and their minority status within the institution, or the fact that they might be bullied or victims of discrimination and things like that. So I would really like to get more into the social science aspect, really, because there are probably some quite unique issues and consequences of racial bias in that field, like research. So if there's any experts out there that want to like work with me on that, I'm all ears. It's always the most difficult thing, really, is finding examples. I mean, not that there's not loads of examples, but I'm a librarian and I work with search strategies to find papers, and it's quite difficult to find papers where somebody's incorrectly interpreted something. You have to basically read a paper. You can't just pop a search strategy about it. So I do rely on other people that have just come across papers that they find problematic and just send them on to me. So I encourage all of that as well. So especially outside of medicine, and more social sciences or other fields. I'm sure there's other fields as well.
Yeah, I know. When I was used to teach a module about issues in research, we had a week in that where we talked about sort of underrepresentation and samples. And yeah, all that thing about weird research participants. So studies where everybody almost in the research pool is Western, educated, from an industrialized country, rich, democratic, and how we use that to draw conclusions about the rest of the world. So yeah, I think lots of interesting psychology papers and sociology papers where that's an issue. And yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, anything that you find, send it on to me.
Well, but yeah, I mean, maybe that's something that some of our attendees could look at, is actually get some sort of bank of papers like this that people can draw on. So I definitely agree that the problem is you can spend hours trying to track them down to use for a 10-minute exercise.
Definitely, yeah, and it's really challenging. And I do have like a bank of papers already, so anyone that goes to the website and sees, I think it's on the trainer guide, so there's loads of papers that you can use as examples for different things. But yeah, they are all very medicine focused, so it would be fantastic to get some other fields in there as well.
Awesome. Well, there's a challenge to all of our attendees today. And I'll finish up with one last question, which is kind of a big one, I guess, before we see if any of our attendees have got any questions as well. So do you think there are any further areas of health research or critical appraisal or anti-racism that people should maybe start thinking about for work that they might want to go on and do in the future, or to start researching or reading about?
Yeah, so certainly, obviously, I'm focused on racial bias, but as I said before, there are loads of other health inequalities: gender, status, people with disabilities, the elderly, LGBTQ, and so on, and they're all underrepresented in healthcare research. And I'm certain that there'll be problems of how research results for other minority groups are analysed as well. I just don't, and something that I want to get into, and this is kind of the focus of the work that I'm doing with Health Education England. So that's about health inequities broadly, so not just about racism. So do check that out when the module comes out, I think in a couple of months. But when it comes to research in general, we regard studies and participants from Europe and the Anglosphere kind of really highly, and maybe tend to disregard those from other countries, India and China and so on. But why do we do that? We have Chinese and Indian people here too, and maybe we could learn something from other countries about how best to care for the people in ours as well. And really, I think most of the problems just kind of stem from the original problem, which is that very largely, and up until recently, well, although still very prevalent, research is conducted by and for white men. White middle-class male is the norm. White culture is the normal culture. So it must be something in this other culture's diet that's making them more susceptible to this illness. And white educational attainment, is the ideal. So African-American students do less well compared to white students, or South Asian students do better compared to white students. It's always white, male, middle class in the center of the universe, and everything else is compared to it as if it's some sort of benchmark. So really, I think every piece of research that we all read that discusses races and ethnicities, just looking out for, is it blaming other people's cultures, other non-white cultures, for the way that they're doing things, or is it actually addressing their needs and saying, well, actually, what, maybe it's us, the system, that needs to do things differently. And this applies to all protected characteristics and minority groups. So I think there's a lot to think about in that. This is all very kind of stems from critical race theory, where white is normal, and just kind of getting rid of that. We have so many in the UK, especially we're so multicultural, that we really need to stop using white as a benchmark for everything, I think. Yeah,
I think there's really interesting potential there for people as well to take that sort of intersectional approach around it as well, because health inequalities aren't just limited by just one characteristic. People are in themselves diverse and represent different aspects of those characteristics. So, yeah, I think absolutely looking at class in terms of social inequities and also health inequities, because there's a lot there. I think it's really interesting with critical appraisal in general, but also particularly with your work, is that I think as librarians, it makes us look beyond just the form of what we're looking at. So when I was first training to be a librarian, we evaluated sources based on, is it current? Is it relevant? Is it, what's the credentials of the person that's written it? And actually doing that dive into it in a lot more detail is really rich. And I think students just really engage with that in my experience. They do seem to enjoy looking at it in that way, I think.
Because I think it's also something that, people understand, people experience it, and it's such a forefrontal problem at the moment that, learning about like research, and this is good research and this is bad research, is very, curriculum-y and a little bit boring. But when you start adding like real problems that people recognize and that they know and actually might want to do something about, it makes the whole topic a lot more interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the lived reality of a lot of the students. I mean, I'm talking about students because, I'm working in a university. That's their lived reality, is that they've experienced these inequities as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, you will get engagement from it. Okay, so I think in a roundabout way, I've done all my questions. Thank you very much. I'm going to pause there for a moment and just see if anyone has any questions. Michelle, if you could help me out.
Yeah, we haven't had any questions in the chat. I do have a question, but I did just wanted to say first to Ramona that I think this is like the closest I've ever been to being like a proud parent. Like me and Darren, I think I probably speak for Darren as well, and that we are so proud to have given you that platform and that you spoke at our event, and we're so excited for all the work that you've done since, and we're just so proud of you.
Thank
if that
you so
means
much.
anything to you at all.
Well, it does. It was just such a great event, and I was so nervous about it, and I think it's opened so many doors, and it was just such a comfortable place to speak at as well. I've spoken since at other events that might have been a little bit less comfortable. So it was a really nice introduction. So I was so pleased. And, the audience and the topics that were being discussed, the other speakers, it all just fit in so well. So I'm so pleased that was my first conference.
Yeah, we're so pleased as well. We have occasionally texted each other over the past year and a bit, just going, "Oh, have you seen this latest thing that Ramona has done?" So yeah, so proud of you.
We're both totally like challenging our stage moms, where it's like it's just like living in your reflected glory.
My question anyway was about, so you mentioned you've got this kind of bank of examples of papers. Have you had any of the authors of those papers come back to you about how you've appraised them or the kind of critique of them?
No, I haven't, not one single one. And I'm always waiting, like someone one day is going to be like, why is my paper on this list? Like start kicking off. And also because of that as well, I have to really make sure that I am putting them on the list for like a good reason, and I'm not like, it's hard to tell sometimes. Critical appraisal and medical jargon, it all gets a bit like, so you have to make sure that I know what I'm talking about and it's on this list for a reason. And I think I've definitely taken things off the list, but no, nobody has contacted me yet, so that's good.
That is good. I mean, I think it kind of speaks to you're doing the right things and you're doing it in good faith, and you're putting in the work to make sure that those examples are examples for a reason as well. So
yeah, I know. So if anybody does ever contact me, though, I'll let you know.
Yes. Yeah, we could probably do this again next year. You'll be like, well, since we last spoke.
I know, I just get hate mail all the time now.
Oh no. Well, hopefully that will never happen. But yeah, it is interesting that you said you've only really been challenged sort of once at another event, because like you sort of said, it is quite a sensitive area for a lot of people, and with white fragility and I don't know what the health sector looks like in terms of, I mean, obviously librarianship is extremely white. I don't know, I would imagine it's a lot more diverse in the health sector, but yeah, that's almost surprising that you've not been challenged more.
It is surprising, actually. And I think, especially now, because like my argument is a bit more robust, and I think the way I worded things previously, you know, if I knew what I know now, then maybe it would be something that I can appreciate why it was challenged. I know what I was trying to say, but you know, sometimes semantics just goes all wrong. But no, so I think hopefully I'm taking that as an indication that actually, you know, what I am saying is true. And now that I've had input from a consultant here about inherited metabolic diseases, and you know, kind of got confirmation that what I'm saying was true, you know, that race and biology are two separate things, and inherited diseases are not to do with race, they're to do with inheritance, right? Genetic ancestry, nothing to do with race. And I think it's just wording it correctly so that it can't be challenged, which I didn't do previously. But yeah, but as I said, you know, being challenged it is valuable, because then at least you do learn from it. Yeah.
So I've got a question that's come up in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, have you seen any retractions or apologies from academics for racial bias in their works? So I'm guessing this maybe doesn't specifically relate to the ones that you've been using as part of your sessions, or those that you've collected, or those you use examples, but in general, maybe many of those retractions or apologies.
So one of them, and I think I mentioned in the CALC talk, there was one of the main ones that I'd mentioned was about COVID. There was a study about COVID and the health disparities between different races, and I think it was African Americans in California. And the original conclusion was about how it's possible that the health disparities were down to genetic factors, and that got changed, so they amended that to say it's probably down to societal factors instead. And then JAMA released, the Journal of American Medical Association, they released a kind of pro forma, or like you know, a kind of way to how we should be reporting about races, and the terminology that we should use and things that we should avoid doing. So they've kind of released this thing last year, and since then I've seen articles published in JAMA that have kind of retracted statements about that. So you know, the research field in general is doing more about how people are you know, approaching the issues of race and health, just basically just saying what I'm saying, just recognizing that things aren't down to biology, and so because of that, yeah, I think a few authors of journals have changed their tune a little bit. And it is, you know, now when you see articles that are published recently, like in the last year, in general, they are very, very careful about the words that they use and the things that they claim as well. So actually, the more, you know, it keeps getting better and better. And I was saying to one of my colleagues the other day that, you know, I'm not going to have to do this soon, because it's just everyone's just going to be doing what they're supposed to be. So I'll be out of my side hustle.
Do you think a lot of that, and I don't know if you've got an opinion, but do you think a lot of that is coming from, in terms of terminology or in terms of interpretation of results, or identifying limitations in people's research? Do you think that's coming more from the individual authors themselves, or do you think that's something that the journals are now saying? It's like, no, we're not going to publish you, or this is an edit or a change you need to make. Where do you think that real driver is coming from for that?
Well, I think it probably is coming from the publishers rather than the individuals. I think, you know, when it comes to things like race versus genetic ancestry, I mean, these are terms and ideas that I guess maybe unless you've looked it up specifically, you don't really know about it. And although researchers should definitely know the difference between race and genetic ancestry, you know, if they're just using the wrong terminology and they're not aware of it. And I think it is kind of the publisher's maybe responsibility. You know, they're the board, they're the ones that are getting this published, and they have a standard to set for their journal, and helping. And you know, if the teacher knows what to do, then the students will follow. So it just reaches a wider scope of people rather than if one individual knows it by themselves. So hopefully it's the publishers, and it would make sense for it to be the publishers. And with this JAMA statement, and I think that other publishers have done it as well, you know, just making it clear, having clear guidelines of what terminology you can and can't use. You know, it's an educational tool as well as, you know, as a guideline as well. Yeah, so yeah, more of that. That's what we want to see. More publishers doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess it's the other part of that sort of triangle as well is then around our discovery platforms and how we classify and how we catalog it as well. That's the whole other side of it in terms of what subject headings and what mesh terms.
I know, and that's like a whole mess, isn't it? That is that's such a big, and if I find that very, I mean, I guess I understand if something's been in place for so long, it might not just be easy to change, but you know, in some of the subject headings that you see, and I don't have any examples at the top of my head, but you think like, well, how is this still going? Like, this needs to change now. And obviously I don't know how easy that is to do, but yeah, this needs to start pulling the finger out. Yeah, that was certainly my experience being a health librarian, feeling deeply uncomfortable having to teach systematic search methods where I'm saying, you're going to have to use this keyword that is appalling, and always give students a trigger warning about, the fact that if we're going to be systematic in this search, we are going to have to use this trigger warning, this particular keyword, which we would never ever use with a patient. We would never use a conversation. It would be struck off almost if you used it with a patient. But it's unbelievable, and it's the same with like cataloguing. I didn't know that much about cataloguing, but from what I understand, we use the National Library of Medicine here, I think, and when we have books about like transgender health and like issues around that, I think the system asks for it to be catalogued under like mental health issues, which is just obviously not appropriate. So we almost have to create our own kind of like little cataloguing system aside it. Cataloguing is absolutely not, I know nothing about it, but these little things that you come across all the time that just reinforce these horrible beliefs that people used to have, and there's just no place for it in this day and age. Absolutely. Michelle, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a real shame that Sarah couldn't join us today, because her talk was, we were going to chat with her more about cataloguing and classification, and that really would have dovetailed nicely with what you were just talking about there. And I had some nice questions for her around, what's happening more generally in terms of looking at, because I know there's some work being done on general kind of classification systems, that kind of stuff. So that would have been a really nice kind of accompaniment, I guess. It
definitely would have been. Well, I'd definitely be interested in hearing what Sarah has been up to, if there's any other way of getting that out of her.
Well, we're hoping, I'm going to try and see if she is able to catch up with us in the next couple of weeks and do a recording of it, which we could then put on the YouTube channel, and hopefully, and I'll get her to watch this and respond.
Brilliant.
Okay, so I've just put into the chat, I think we've got 3 minutes left. So last chance for if anyone has any very quick questions. This is definitely the downside of doing things in an online environment. Like, you can usually get a sense in a room, like, are we done here for questions or not? I'm going to call it. I'm going to say, no, we don't have any more questions. But thank you so much, Ramona. It was really good to chat with you and just to get
thank you so much.
All the amazing things you've been doing. So yeah, please, everybody in the chat, please express your thanks for us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure. Always happy to come back as well. So please bring me back in the future.
Holding you to that, most definitely. It's apparently it makes a ton of extra work for you, but we're always happy to provide that.
Yeah, we want to hear next year, this is how I solved this issue, and it's all done now. So
yeah. Oh, brilliant. Oh, well, thank you again.
Okay.